Bryndan Moore here. I'm a longtime audiophile and producer. I've been podcasting since before podcasting was even called podcasting. It was just recording interviews remotely. And in order to put it out and share it with everybody, we put it on video platforms like YouTube. Over the last, say, 20 years of doing that, I've become really super sensitive about creating great audio and making sure that conversations are as future-proof as possible when they're important. And that comes from having some conversations that are almost unlistenable now because the technology of the day is just so different. What changes have you noticed since practicing yoga, and how do you find the time to incorporate that into your daily life being so busy?
Well, they say if you can't meditate for 20 minutes in the morning, you need 2 hours. So I take my time every day for that.
So among the things I do, I produce podcasts. I have my own podcast called The Black Futurist and produce several other podcasts. And the one that I'm working on right now is called Official Ignorance. It's about death in law enforcement custody. It's a fantastic show with 2 really smart hosts. In this particular podcast, I'm invisible. You don't hear my voice at all, but you do hear my influence in the sound and everything that we do. So I thought I'd share a few behind the scenes remarks and comments about the making of that show, so that I think if you're interested, you might appreciate it even more. Let's go. One of the things to know about Official Ignorance is that it's about death in law enforcement custody. And it's headlined by 2 authors who share a book. Both are doctors. One is a historian and PhD. The other one is a medical doctor, chief medical examiner, and chief medical officer down at Howard University Hospital. So these guys are invested and super smart. And then the guests we bring on are fantastic. They're historical figures. They're people who have done a lot in the space. And what you get when you have a show like that is a lot of potential for the topic to be inaccessible, to be unapproachable by the layman. And that's not what you want when dealing with a podcast. You want everybody to be able to on-ramp at any given time and understand what's going on and relate to the topic, and then give them a reason to want to participate further. So the first thing when ideating this show was making sure that we could create environments where we could record the best audio. So if you pick it up a year from now and listen to the show, it'll sound within the context of what you're hearing then. That involved audio design and saying, listen, let's figure out what our constrictions are, what our needs are, and what our environments are going to be, and plan equipment based on that. So we did that.
It was also at that time that there were videos of police killings and videos of police brutality circulating widely in the United States. And I was beginning to notice those videos in the same way that I would notice what was going on in Syria and what was circulating from many African countries.
I think what most people do when they're podcasting is one of 2 ways. Either you go way too far and buy every single thing under the sun thinking that it's going to make a difference, or you don't get anything and you don't do anything to your environment, and therefore it makes it really hard to listen to. The thing that we had going on with these 2 guys is they both were very busy. Their schedules were such that they would be on travel at times, and we had to plan for how do we get the very best sound even when the environment changes. So how do we treat the existing environment without going too far, and then how do we get the best sound even when they're on the road? I think we did an incredible job. The show sounds fantastic.
I'm Roger Mitchell. I'm from Jersey, born and raised. I went to Howard University, that's where we met in the 90s at the height of hip hop. I left there and went to the FBI. I was a forensic biologist there. I was one of the first Black forensic biologists in the country.
Another thing that happened in the show is we needed to ideate how to break up the equivalent of like a wall of text. The way you break that up visually is pictures, colors, typography. When you're dealing with an audio medium, it's the same thing, but it's not as simple as throwing a picture in. We knew that we wanted to have some narration, kind of a voice of God, somebody to move us along in a few places. And I wanted that voice to be female. One of the authors, Roger Mitchell, has a daughter, and she was very comfortable in front of the camera, in front of the microphone, and very willing to take direction.
Okay, I can do that again. I stumbled.
Hey, performing.
Southern trees bear strange fruit. Blood on the leaves and blood at the root.
That was fantastic. Hold on one second.
Okay.
So that's very cool that you got to have the father-daughter thing there, and the voice of God as a woman. I thought that was pretty cool. Next, I want to talk about soundscape. Again, we're trying to break up this wall of text on this really important topic. And what we need to do is create tone and mood and pace. And so I spent a good amount of time just trying to think about, what did I want you to feel in this moment? Think about your favorite movie or favorite television show and imagine it with everything you see, but no words. If you listen, there's a soundscape that happens underneath that entire movie or show that lets you know this is how you're supposed to feel. It informs your other brain. This is the tone and the mood of this scene. So I want to give you a few short examples of what that soundscape sounds like for Official Ignorance, the podcast.
If this had happened today, then those witnesses would have had cell phone videos. The likelihood is that those law officers would have had body-worn camera video. It would have been all over the news. At the very least, the footage would have been made available. And there would have been no doubt in anyone's mind that these men killed Earl Faison.
There's a couple things happening. Number one, as you can hear, there's that piano note playing. And there's no way in any context that is a relaxing sound, right? That is chosen deliberately. That is a sound that almost has tension or, high alert. And that's exactly what's happening in this segment. And if you're listening, you're hearing Dr. Roger Mitchell talk about the overall theme of this show is the storytelling about this gentleman who was killed by law enforcement in New Jersey, Earl Faison. And in this particular segment, he's saying, you should be on alert. You need to know as a citizen, as a human, that this injustice happened. And as we know, if injustice happens to one person, it can happen to all of us. So that idea, that concept was so important. I didn't want you to be comfortable in this moment. I wanted you to be uncomfortable. And it also reminds me of a scene from Ghostbusters. If you are a sci-fi fan, which I'm a huge sci-fi fan, there was a scene where Bill Murray, playing Peter Venkman, comes into Sigourney Weaver's apartment, and she's had like a ghost experience in her apartment. And he comes in at her request, and he's going over kind of with his little meter, and he's checking around the apartment, and he goes over to the piano, and he starts playing that note over and over again. Like, it's creepy in here. Something, we're on high alert. Shout out to the Ghostbusters.
He's gathered, he's beaten, he's thrown in the back of a car, he's taken to Orange Police Department, he's pepper sprayed, he's brought to the medical examiner's office, and the medical examiner says he dies from asthma.
Stop here. Now you notice that eerie piano stops before Dr. Mitchell completes his statement. Again, this is all very deliberate. It's just to say that you now have heard this noise enough times that you've almost normalized it in your brain. It's not as jarring as it was in the first couple beats. So stopping it now brings us and our attention right back to the current moment, right when he delivers the important line of, and this guy was killed by law enforcement, which is the theme of the entire podcast and the entire episode.
Faison. He's gathered, he's beaten, he's thrown in the back of a car, he's taken to Orange Police Department, he's pepper sprayed, he's brought to the medical examiner's office, and the medical examiner says he dies from asthma.
Soundscape. Another thing to know about this show is that it's executive produced by an organization called Hip Hop Caucus, which is a political organization that aims to rally those who identify with hip hop culture towards political change and advancement. So there's this edge on hip hop. Now, what does that mean? And how do we tie that into the show? Well, it took some real subtlety, and it wasn't even a mandate for the show, because the show could have just been a political show or an informative show, an educational show, but I felt like there were ways to really lean into that idea in subtlety, because these guys are, academic superstars. You also don't want to create a situation where you're imbalanced and going too heavy on hip hop, which could maybe not be as accepted in their academic spaces. And I could be dead wrong about that, but I'm going to show you an example of how we tied those things in.
Welcome to Official Ignorance, the Death in Custody podcast, hosted by Dr. Roger Mitchell Jr. and Professor Jay Aronson.
It's this part.
You are now listening to the sounds of official ignorance.
Now, all of you Wu-Tang fans might get the reference there. There's a song on Ghostface album, Supreme Clientele. It's called Stroke of Death. It starts like this. Really recognizable. If you've heard it before, you've heard it before. Anyways, we skip forward in that song. There's a part that's kind of an intermission between two verses, and this is where we pulled that idea from for Nina to read.
It's coming all out of your face to get your clap guard.
You are now listening to the sounds of Supreme Clientele.
So again, super subtle. Hip hop is run through the entire show. It's a key identifier for the two podcast hosts. It's a fine balance, and that's just one way of many little Easter eggs that you'll find in the soundscape of the show. We're talking about season 1, episode 1 of Official Ignorance, the podcast, and we're talking about the soundscape and the production of the show. There was stories about when Questlove was working with Dilla back in the Soulquarian days, and Questlove would go on to say that hearing Dilla's music and what he allowed himself to do opened the door for Quest's own production style, saying his big surprise was basically that the music didn't have to be quantized. Everything didn't have to land on the beat. You know, Dilla would famously use MPC and tap beats out with his hands, and he wouldn't snap those musical beats and samples and tones to the sound grid. He would allow it to be human, whereas everyone else in music up to that point, every beat was on time or it's wrong. Why am I telling you this? It's because for hip hop, as much as it meant to these two writers, it was important to me that lived in here, and that was one of the pieces that really struck me about the soundscape of this show. There's a lot of storytelling in between fact-telling. So in the storytelling moments of the show, I didn't want to be held to snapping to the grid. Let there be art. These guys are providing kind of the play-by-play. Well, what is the color commentary? And here's an example. If you listen to the soundscape behind the story we're going to hear, it doesn't snap to grid. It is not music. It is made of musical tones and notes, but it is really responsive to the story being told in the time of the storyteller. Take a listen.
Only one place that this podcast can start, and that's Orange, New Jersey, the death in custody of a 27-year-old man named Earl Faison.
It was April 1999. I was a first-year medical student, University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey. I wanted to be a forensic pathologist. I wanted to study violence as a public health issue. I wanted to solve the ills of the world. 23 years old. It was on the heels of the killing of Amadou Diallo. He had just been killed in February of that same year. And then Earl Faison. Earl Faison. He wasn't much older than me, 27 years old, and he was killed too.
So that's the idea there. It's not music. The pace setter is the storyteller. And I thought that was a very fun and deliberate discovery that was infused into the show. My name is Bryndan Moore, and I'm the producer of Official Ignorance, the podcast. I really would love for you to check out the show and let me know your thoughts. Also, you can visit us at officialignorance.com to learn more about the show and to find the episodes. Talk to you soon.